By 1945, towards the end of the Second World War, the Japanese Emperor, Showa, personally referred to as Emperor Hirohito, made a final plea to his depleted air force. "Be my final kamikaze," he urged. The pilots knew what their emperor demanded of them: one-way suicide flights into the United States naval fleets. But that word kamikaze, which means divine winds, has an aged, dark history in Japan, a history that would be immortalized and then invoked upon by Emperor Hirohito nearly 700 years later. The term kamikaze was first used after two miraculous typhoons saved Japan from Kublai Khan in the 13th century. This video will walk you through that history. The origin of the word kamikaze has to begin with Genghis Khan, the great conqueror, universal ruler, and Mongolian warrior. Genghis was a ruthless conqueror remembered mostly for his terror conquests and his mercilessness towards his enemies. By the turn of the 13th century, Genghis has already laid a strong foundation for the Mongolian Empire. He had wiped out all opposition, one of the most popular being the Khwarezm dynasty, who Genghis's diplomatic entourage, as a punishment, Genghis spared no living thing from the dynasty. Domestic animals and livestock were killed. Skulls of men, women, and children were piled in large, pyramidal mounds. The cities were brought to their knees, and eventually the Shah Muhammad, ruler of the Khwarezm dynasty, and later his son, were captured and killed, bringing an end to the Khwarezm dynasty in 1221. Genghis was ruthless, and he passed this strain down his bloodline. His grandson Kublai Khan extended Genghis Khan's legacy to its ultimate possible strength. During his reign, the borders of the Mongols held territories which spanned two continents. By the year 1280, it had become the largest empire in history. In the west, it had reached the banks of the Danube, encompassing a great portion of Russia, including Moscow and Kiev. It spanned to the Himalayas in the south farther into the north, and embraced all of China and Korea in the east. It was during Genghis and his son and grandson's reign that the first contact between the east and the west would happen. However, throughout his reign, Kublai Khan was never able to conquer Japan, a country that was just 100 miles away from his territory. This had nothing to do with Japan's military fortitude. Instead, two typhoons saved them from the Mongols. By 1271, Kublai Khan had defeated the Song dynasty and had declared himself the first emperor of China's Yuan dynasty, which literally means first beginning. At this time, he ruled over much of China, Mongolia, and Korea. Japan had outrightly disrespected him, and this was the year he chose to conquer them mercilessly, as his grandfather had done. In 1266, Kublai Khan had sent a message to the Emperor of Japan, whom he addressed as the ruler of a small country, and demanded that Japan pay him tribute. The Japanese refused. Impudence to the Mongol Empire was unheard of, so Kublai Khan proceeded on plans to invade Japan as early as 1272. In preparation, Khan had a proper armada of warships, around 300 to 600 vessels, built. An army of 40,000 men, which included Chinese and Korean men, was raised. To counter this military might, the Japanese could only muster 10,000 fighting samurai, who were all previously squabbling amongst themselves. Needless to say, they were grossly outmatched. By autumn 1274, the Mongols and their subjects were ready. They marched on Japan and launched a strike on them. Hundreds of larger ships and an even larger number of small boats, between 500 to 900, set out into the Sea of Japan. They quickly seized the islands of Tsushima and Iki, slaughtering approximately 300 residents they found therein. Then the armada came upon Hakata Bay, near the present-day city of Fukuoka on the island of Kyushu. Beyond an obvious numerical limitation, the Japanese samurai code, Bushido, also affected them. The code demanded that before a fight, a samurai warrior would step out, announce his name and lineage, and prepare for one-on-one combat with a foe. The Mongols were completely unfamiliar with this code, so whenever a lone samurai stepped out, the Mongols would simply attack him in hordes and cut him down. The Mongols also had poison-tipped arrows, catapult-launched explosive shells, and more accurate bows. They also fought in unit, had drumbeats that relayed the orders guiding their coordinated attacks, all new and alien techniques to the Japanese samurais. They were outmatched in every way. After the first day, the wounded Japanese army retreated, and at night, a driving wind and heavy rain began to bite at the coast. By nightfall, the strong wind and high turf had worsened, and it ruined the Mongol ships completely at Hakata Bay. The great armada of the Mongols sailed into the open arms of the approaching Typhoon. A third of the armada's ships sank to the bottom of the Pacific, and about 13,000 of Kublai Khan's soldiers drowned. The remaining had no choice but to return home. In the aftermath of the debacle, Kublai Khan termed it as mere bad luck. He sent a 6-man delegation to demand that the Japanese emperor travel to Dadu, now Beijing, and kowtow to him. In response, the Japanese beheaded the Chinese diplomats, an unacceptable gesture to the Mongols, who had wiped out the Khwarezm dynasty for the same crime. Kublai Khan was now more determined than ever to conquer Japan. Japan, too, was prepared. The leaders of Kyushu had the landowning class build a 15-foot high and 25 miles long wall. Construction took 5 years. In addition, the leaders took a census of all available warriors and weaponry. In Kublai Khan's camp, he created a new government division named the Ministry for Conquering Japan. And in 1280, the ministry came up with plans for a two-pronged attack the following spring. The Japanese knew the Mongols were coming this time around. The samurais prepared better, and they had dispelled any notion of solitary battle Bushido code. There was more of them this time around, with around 40,000 warriors in the new army to face the Mongols. They assembled behind their new defensive wall at Hakata Bay, waiting. They were no match. The Mongols sent 2 separate, simultaneous forces this time around. 900 ships containing 40,000 men set out from Masan, and a whopping 100,000 force sailed from southern China in 3,500 ships. They planned for an overwhelming combined imperial attack on Japan. The first fleet reached Hakata Bay on June 23, 1281, but the ships from China weren't in position yet. The smaller division couldn't handle the samurai's new cunningness. The samurai rolled out to the Mongol ships at night, and with the cover of darkness, they set fire to the ships and killed the troops, then rowed back to land. This went on for 50 more days and 50 nights as the first fleet waited for reinforcements from the other, more superior fleet. On August 12th, the Mongols' main fleet landed at Hakata Bay, 3 times more than the samurai numbers. They were bound to slaughter them mercilessly. The will left to fight for the samurai was fueled entirely by bravery and honor. It was around this period that the Typhoon returned. On August 12, 1281, the second Typhoon decimated Kublai Khan's ships. 4,400 ships were destroyed, and nearly all the soldiers died in the storm. The few thousand who struggled onto the shore were hounded and killed mercilessly by the samurais. The victory was theirs. Kublai Khan would cut his losses and would never attempt another invasion on Japan. He believed that the Japanese were definitely under supernatural protection. On their part, the Japanese believed it was their gods who rescued them. They termed the 2 typhoons that saved them kamikazes, divine wind. 7 centuries later, during the dying embers of another type of war, Emperor Hirohito would beckon his fighter pilots to dare death by invoking the kamikazes again. Today, scientists have uncovered geological evidence to corroborate the fact that these typhoons actually aided the Japanese in the 13th century. Remains of Mongol ships have also been found in Japanese seas. Kindly subscribe to the channel below, and please like this video as well. What do you think about Genghis Khan, his vicious brutality, Kublai Khan, and also his intent on conquering Japan, the Mongol Empire, and the divine typhoons that saved Japan? Please let us know in the comment section below.